good day today? You're not convincing me. Are you glad at least to be in church tonight?
Yes.
I'm glad that you're here. I really am. And that preacher last night wore me out. So I don't want to be like him. So I want to get right to it. Mark chapter 9. I want us to go back to that section that we looked at last night and get into what we left out. I've been feeling kind of bad about not entering the void of the story. I mean, to see his healing. And so I'd like to go back and let me just explain to you what I want to do. It's going to be a little bit different. I just simply want us to move through the passage. I want us to go through the different movements. I want us to see the different aspects of the story, maybe some of the characters. But through that, see the solution that is found and be encouraged by the time we leave this place. I found that, when we gather like this, there are all kinds of people that come. You know that? I mean, we put smiles on our faces. Some of us do. Some of y'all aren't, but we put smile on our faces, but that doesn't mean that we're not discouraged. It doesn't mean that things aren't going on at home. And so my prayer all day has been, whatever we need, I pray that we find it in His presence tonight. I really would hope that we would come to the place where we realize that the thing that we need above all other things is more of His presence. Because it's in His presence that all our things are met. And so we're going to read verses 14 through 27 from Mark chapter 9. And when Jesus came to the disciples, He saw a great multitude around them and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw Him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to Him, greeted Him. And Jesus asked the scribes, "What are you discussing with them?" Then one of the crowd answered and said, "Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit. And wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not." Jesus answered him and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Then they brought him to him. And when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And often he has thrown them both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said, "If you can believe," actually the manuscript's a little bit stronger than that. It should say, "If you can, all things are possible to him who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "Deaf and dumb spirit, come out, I command you, come out of him, and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, "He is dead." How many of you were here last night? That's that part of that. I still don't care, but anyhow. He became as dead, so that many said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. I don't know if you've noticed this in your life or not, but I'm going to be very honest with you tonight. I think the kind of people that come to church on Tuesday night can handle a bit of honesty. I hope there are some real people that are here. But in my life, and I think probably in yours as well, there seems to be this natural tension that plays out between faith and doubt. We really want to believe. In fact, I believe we do believe. But I've told you all week long that I have a problem. I'm obsessive compulsive. I'm analytical. Things get in my mind and I try to pick them apart. I try to figure it out. And there are times that I know in my heart what the Word says. And I know that He is true to His Word, but my mind begins to interfere with my heart. There are times that I see what's going on around me, and it begins to cause me just to wonder every now and then. Now maybe you've a little bit farther along than I am. Maybe you're more holy than that. But I would suggest that there is a tension that occurs between faith and doubt. I don't feel along in that because it seems like that's always the battle. It seems like it always has been. I say that because I can point out instances in the Old Testament and the New Testament where the people that we would refer to as great men and women of faith, those that God would call to do great things, where they struggled. Even though God said, I think about the prophets. I think about all that God had said to them and wanted them to go and do, and they heard His voice, and yet somehow there was a struggle that would occur. I mean, it was true in the Old Testament, it's true in the New. You don't have to look any further than the disciples in the New Testament. Anybody else want to be willing to say like me, the disciples get on my nerves? I figured out why they get on my nerves. Because I see myself in them. They act as foolish as I do. I mean, here are these men who know who He is. They've watched what He has done. They have been there to see all the wonderful things that we read about. And yet, Jesus will present them with something, and they'll just act silly. I'm telling you, folks, there is this tension that occurs between faith and doubt. How do you find hope when it seems like all hope is gone? Have you ever been there? And yet we believe that He is hope, that He has hope, and yet everything around us seems hopeless. How do you hold on to hope in moments like that? How do you find peace when the world, when your home, when work is anything but peaceful? You turn on the television and you see war is raging all around. You see that even good news is somehow twisted into bad news. You come home and where you want to relax and get away from it all, you see that there is tension that's being played out there. Even those that you're closest to, sometimes it seems like you can't get along with. You go to work and those people that you're working with, instead of being on a team, it seems like they're out to get you. Folks, how do you find peace when everything is but peaceful? It's incredible. How can you find life in the midst of death? Now that might seem extreme, but I'm reminded of a man in Scripture, a man by the name of Jairus that came to Jesus to implore Him on his daughter's behalf. You'll remember that he was a ruler of the synagogue, and he had a little girl that's 12 years old. And depending on which gospel writer you read, she's either on her deathbed or she has died. Whatever it is, she is in a very critical condition, and Jairus is begging Jesus to move on his behalf, to come to his house and to touch his little girl. And have you ever noticed this about Jesus? He always goes where He's invited. We watch as He begins to make His way with Jairus to Jairus' home. The crowd is following along. They want to see what Jesus is going to do to this great man's little girl. And in the midst of the procession, there's this woman who has an issue. 12 years she's wrestled with it. This hemorrhaging, this bleeding in her body. And can I just say this? I mentioned just a moment ago that his little girl was 12 years old and lying on her deathbed. And here we see this woman, I don't think it's coincidental, who has been dealing with an issue for 12 years. You know, 12 years is really a matter of perspective. In the span of one's life, that's much too short. There's so many experiences that this little girl has not had yet. So many things. It's too short of a span of a life. But for dealing with something going on in your body, 12 years can seem like an eternity. When you go to doctor and there is no answer, nothing brings relief, and finally you come to the place where you're not only physically broken, not only spiritually it would seem broken, but now you're financially broken as well. That's an eternity to deal with a problem with no solution. She slips in on this day, the unwanted one. The one that it was viewed that she was getting exactly what she deserved. This was a result of her sin. Actually a working out or an expiation of her sin. She was deserving of this punishment, and she pushes through the crowd and she gets a hold of just the border. Gets a hold of just a little bit, just the hem of Jesus' garment. And when she gets a hold of that, oh, that we would tonight just get a little piece of Jesus. Because when she gets a hold of Jesus, everything that she had sought after, everything that she had given, all she had to find, she found in the touch of Jesus. She was completely made well. It was gone. The bleeding
stopped, Jesus gave her life back. Now, I don't read she got her money back, but I don't think she cared. But what we need to see here is don't forget the context of this woman's healing. Jairus had been imploring Jesus on his little girl's behalf. Time was precious. And when this nobody, remember, he's the ruler of the synagogue. He could have been the one who said, "You're not welcome here. God doesn't love you, and neither do we." When this nobody, this unclean one, slipped in and stopped the procession, I can't imagine the feelings that was going on. I'm glad that Jesus doesn't mind interruptions, but I'm sure Jairus did. We don't know how much time passed. We know there's a conversation that goes on. And he's thinking about his little girl. Sooner or later, the journey begins. But now it's too late. Because as they continue to his home, they're met from members of that household, servants or members, that they come and they say, "Hey, don't bother Jesus anymore. Leave the teacher alone because your daughter, she's dead." Now, I don't know how Jairus responded. I said it yesterday, I'm not a father. I don't know what it means to love a child. I've been a son. I know how much my parents love me. But I don't know, but I know his heart broke. I don't know if he collapsed under that news. I don't know if his face turned red and blotchy, or if tears welled up in his eyes and began to flow down. Something happened because we watch Jesus. He moves in this moment. In my mind, Jesus puts his arm around the Father. See, that's the kind of Jesus I have. If you're Jesus and like that, I feel sorry for you. But he said, this is what he says to him. He says, "Only believe." Hear his words. Only believe. I will ask you again. How do you believe for life when death has come upon the scene? There are times in our living that what we believe and what we see, our faith begins to become contaminated with doubt. It's just a part of life. It seems like it always has been. And if we're not careful, we might fall into the trap of believing that it always will be. Now, the reason why that's necessary for us to think about tonight is because that's exactly what's going on in the text that we read together. Now, you remember if you were here last evening, last night we started with the confession. We threw a lot in there last night. That's why it took so long. Well, not really, but anyhow, it's long with it. But anyhow, you don't care. Yeah, you do. We started up on the Mount of Transfiguration, where Jesus took the big mouse after a 6-day argument. Jesus has said, "I'm going to a cross." First time they'd heard anything like that before, and they began to say, it's not going to happen like that. So something had to happen. They're in their 3rd year. Jesus is headed to Jerusalem. These are the men that's entrusted. They needed to get plugged in. There needed to be a change that would occur. So the transfiguration occurs on top of the mount, where there's an interruption of an incredible conversation. But then there's a divine interruption that seems to settle the argument, at least in that moment. And now, as they're coming down from that mountaintop experience, the main concern that the disciples seem to have is, what does Jesus mean by rising from the dead? They didn't understand what he was talking about at that point. It didn't make sense with what they believed and what they had been taught. And as they come down from the valley of this mountaintop experience down to the valley of living, such a contrast. You have heavenly moments up here. I said it last night. It was almost as though heaven touches earth. These glorious mountaintop moments. It was experienced like that. And down here in the valley of life, chaos has unfolded. You could say that all hell has broken loose. And so we come down from the mount down to the valley of living, and Jesus walks into the middle of that mess. And I said it before, but I'm a preacher, so I can repeat myself. I'm thankful that I have a Jesus who's willing to walk into the middle of our messes, aren't you? Oh, see, some of you thought you're so clean that you didn't have a mess. No, you had a mess. And he was willing to walk right into the middle of that, and I'm thankful that he walked into the middle of my mess, and he walked into the middle of this mess. And I wasn't going to touch on this because I really do want to be brief, but I love what happens here. I watch as Jesus walks up to the religious leadership, and this is what he says. This is a beautiful picture of it. He says, "What are you," speaking to the religious leadership, "fussing about What are you discussing? What are you disputing? What are you debating? What are you arguing? What are you quarreling? What are you fussing with them about? Don't you love that? I really do. I love that. He walks up to the religious leadership and says, what are you all fussing with them, the 9 disciples, about? Oh, see, you're not seeing it. He doesn't go to the disciples and say, okay, guys, I leave you here for this period of time. This also, what are you fighting with them over? No, he doesn't go to them. He goes to the source of the issue. And he asks them, remember, it's these religious leaderships since chapter 2, but specifically chapter 3, when you hit verse 6, they have made a decision that they want Jesus dead. They don't want anything to do with this man. They don't want anything to do with this kingdom. So they begin to look for ways to trip him up and to get him out of the picture. So they're always butting heads. They're always a source of friction. Always a source of dissonance. And so he walks up to the religious leadership and he says, what are you fussing with them about? You want to know why I like it? Because it shows me the kind of Jesus that I have. It shows me that I have a Jesus that has my back. I'm thankful for that. Aren't you glad that you have a Jesus that has your back? If you're a preacher, you better say amen. There are so many times that people feel like they've got something to prove. And you know what? Here's the deal. I'm not your pastor. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not. If you've got a problem, if you can show me in the Word where I'm wrong, I'll accept it. But if you just want to get your opinion across to me, I'm not interested in your opinion. You shouldn't be interested in my opinion. Because opinions mean nothing. It's about His Word. And when people want to attack you because you stand on His Word, they can't. Because if we will stand for Him, He will fight for us. That's why I'm not going to waste my time arguing. Your problem's not with me. Deal with Him. He'll handle it. Oh, see, that just blesses me. If we would just be the kind of people, some people walk around with a chip on their shoulder. I'm sure there's one or two here in Carthage. There might be one here tonight, walking around with a chip on their shoulder. And all I want to do when I meet people like that, I want to go and knock it off. I don't care if you've got these big old arms. You know, I want to knock it off because it just seems like they want to argue about everything. And all we need to do is like Jude instructs the early church. If we will just stand up and square our shoulders back and contend for the content of our Christianity, if we will stand up for Jesus, then He will do the fighting. And here's the deal. The victory has already been won. Hey, somebody needs to say amen about that. You need to at least smile whether you've had a good day or a bad day. That's good news because when you stand on His Word, He will fight for you. So Jesus walks into the middle of this scene. And the first thing that we see, this is what I want us to notice. The first aspect or movement of this passage of Scripture. And you can use whatever descriptor you would like. We see the quarreling. We see the feuding. I like fussing. I don't know, my mom and Mama always said that. Fussing, arguing, disputing, debating disciples. We see the fighting, quarreling disciples. It's obvious that's what's going on there in that valley. And we won't spend a lot of time here, but we need to spend a minute here. Because I've learned some things in the years that I've been traveling. I can say to you that there are things that we as a church, there are things that we do well. There really are. We need to know that. There are things that we do well. Some wonderful things. Things that we do well. And then there are some things that we're not so good at. Things that we do poorly or not so well. And one of the things that I found that we are really good at, one of the things that we really do well, is we like to fight. I'm not sure we should be proud about that. But we like to quarrel. We like to feud. Now, I'm not putting this on you. This doesn't apply to the people who are here tonight. Obviously, you all are good people. I'm talking about everybody else I preach to.
Not Carthage First Church of the Nazarene, every other church, whatever label that I go to. I meet people who like to fight. I mean, honestly, at whatever level you want to look at it, you find the fighting. You could look at it on the Holy Catholic Church, the Church of Jesus Christ, not the Roman Catholic, but the Universal Church of Jesus Christ. We like to fuss amongst one another. And usually it's a denominational type thing. And it's usually this group wants to prove this group wrong, and this group wants to tear this person down because they have a bigger platform, and really what it is, they're jealous, and all these things are going on. And you know what, I'm just going to say this, that's tiring. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say, it's Tuesday night. If you don't like me by now, you're not going to, so I'm not going to lose anything. I'm sick of that. I really am, because I found that most of the things that we like to fight with one another over are non-essential things. I will tell you that if you believe this book to be the Word of God, if you believe the essentials of the gospel message, if you don't compromise, if you live by His Word, then you're my kind of people. And if we would just come to the place that we would link hands, that we would link arms and realize that we are on the same team, then maybe we could have an impact on our culture. Maybe we could impact our society instead of fighting with one another. We are really good at fighting. Well, you're not blessed by that, so I'll move from that universal level and move down to a denominational level. We'll talk about the Church of the Nazarene for a moment, because that's what I'm a member of, and the title of this place is the Church of the Nazarene, so we can talk about it. I found that we like to fuss in the Church of the Nazarene, the General Church of the Nazarene, and if you disagree with that, you haven't been on Facebook. I mean, if you would look at any group on Facebook that would have the name Nazarene, concerned, whatever, different ones that are different titles. Concern's the only one that came to my mind, but there are others too. Reformed, all these different things. If you want to look at those, you'll see usually what goes on in there. I've removed myself from all those things, by the way, because I don't want to read it. All it is this generation is tearing this generation down. This person is attacking this person, and it's all over this. You know, they don't get it, and they don't get it. This is what Nazarene is. This one says this is what Nazarene is. It's embarrassing, because you know what? The world looks at that, and if we can't get along, if we have that kind of witness, who wants to be part of that? Well, you obviously don't read those rooms on Facebook, so I'll just move. Every 4 years, we have this thing called General Assembly in the Church of the Nazarene. Other places would call it General Convention, and different denominations do it at different times. We do ours every 4 years. Different places. Seems like though we always end up in Indianapolis one way or another. And people ask me all the time, I have been to General Assemblies, but they ask me all the time, are you going to be in General Assembly? And my answer is, if there are that many Nazarenes in Indianapolis, I am going to Destin. I'm going to Florida. That's where I'm... Loosen up. Loosen up. It's just a good time, because then all the women are mine. You know, but if you've ever gone to one and sat in any of those meetings where the soup is made, where the stew is stirred, where the manual issues are discussed, you will watch people. Now, we make it a little bit more holy in the church because we call it roundtable discussions, but it's fussing. But anyhow, you'll watch people get red in the face over what they think. Oh, well, you're not getting blessed by this either. I'm getting in trouble. So we'll move from the denominational level, the general church level, down to the local church level. And I don't know you all, and so this is not directed toward you, because like I said, you seem to be sweet people. Not all of you, but most of you. That's another story, but I'm going to poke you till you smile. Okay, sorry, I'm going to smile. I'm just be surprised when I come back there and really poke you. But anyhow, you know, I have found that in churches we like to fuss with one another. I actually met a lady not too long ago
who left one church and came to another, bless that church, came over there because someone at the other church said something about her banana pudding. It'd be funny if that weren't prophetic. I mean, as God's people, we ought to be bigger than that, but that's the foolishness. But I'm glad that God knows who we are. Are you thankful for that? And He fits us for our calling. And He has called me to be an evangelist, which means that I come into a place and I'm there for 4 days, if it's summer, a little bit longer, but a certain amount of services, 5 usually, and then I'm gone. That means I'm not a pastor. And I'm thankful God didn't call me to be a pastor. It's not who I am. Because if I were a pastor, I would have to deal with you. Not you, but... And it goes the other way too. You would have to deal with me. And I guarantee you, there's a reason why I'm only here for 5 services. You would run me off quickly. Some of you are ready to do it now. But anyhow, I just know that's the way it is. But as a pastor, I would have to deal with one of those blessed things. Now, I have a board for my ministry, but it's different. But I have to deal with the church board. And I'm sure the church board here, like I said, I'm not talking about you, is a wonderful church board. But I have been in some places where that's not been the case. I actually went to a church where I was boycotted for revival by the church board. They didn't want me there. And the reason why they didn't want me there wasn't because they knew anything about me. But they didn't, that's caused some people not to want me to go too. But they didn't want me there because the revival time was during Fair Week in their community. And they just didn't think the church should have revival during the fair. Because how could we go to the fair if we came to church? And I went there that week, and it was miserable because everybody in the church, they were moping around. None of the board members showed up. The pastor was discouraged, all this different stuff. And so I just told them, I said, you guys are the people that elect the board. If you don't like what they're doing, if their life isn't evidence that Jesus Christ is living through them, vote them out. Good advice. However, I was never invited back, and that's fine with me. But and that wasn't a Nazarene church. But in the Church of the Nazarene, I know, I'm confused. I'm sure our boards aren't as bad, but I hear some stories. And I am confused because I know in the manual, I took a polity class when I was getting all my requirements in college. It says that if you're going to be a board member in the Church of the Nazarene, you have to be saved. You have to be a Christian. And I've met some that's been questionable, although that's not my call, so I'll leave that to God. So I'll go on next. I know that it also, I don't think they've taken it out, says in the Nazarene manual that if you're going to be on the church board, that you need to be entirely sanctified. You need to be sold out, Spirit-filled, Spirit-led. And I know that I've met board members who have not, because frankly, whatever fruit you're growing on your limbs, we'll be able to see it. I mean, I've heard of board members who don't pay their tithe. And by the way, if you want to be silly, well, that's Old Testament. Last I checked, it was still all one book, and Jesus is throughout the whole thing. And Jesus spoke in favor of the tithe. And I just wonder, how dare you, sir, how dare you, ma'am, think you have any right to spend God's money when you're not willing to give yours? You don't belong on that board. Amen or ouch? I've heard of board members who get red in the face. He goes, this is how it's going to happen. And it's not because God said, this is what I want. No, it's what I want! I'm just confused. I mean, see, you understand fussing? The reason why this is important, when we see the fighting disciples, the fussing, the quarreling disciples, it's not doing a thing for that boy nor that father. That dad is still just as concerned for his son whose life is hanging in the balance. And all they want to do is fuss and fight. Do you know what it's akin to? See, the thing is, the enemy doesn't fear feuding, fussing, quarreling disciples. The only kind of disciple the enemy is afraid of are those who are dependent and desperate on God. Those are the ones that rattle the gates of hell. Those are the ones that send the enemies running. These just play for their team. This, when we see this, this is akin. How many of you watch cooking shows? She got excited about it. She's an excitable person. But anyhow, you know, I don't watch those things because I don't like to cook. But I do like to eat. And when I watch those things, it makes me want to eat. And I'm trying to lose about 15 pounds. I need to get some off me. And so I try not to watch it so I don't eat. But what it would be akin to a bunch of those chefs fighting over ingredients while people are starving to death. Let me say it a different way. When we see these quarreling, fighting disciples, it's like a bunch of cooks that would rather fight about recipes than to feed people who are dying of starvation, dying of hunger. Folks, we need to be big enough to get beyond ourselves and begin to realize there is a world that needs to see Him. It's not about our fussing. But the first thing you see is the fighting, the feuding disciples. The reason why fussing isn't any good, the only thing that it leads to, it moves us into the next aspect of our story. It moves, the only thing fussing and fighting is good for is it leads to frustration. It's all over our text. I mean, and it's easily proved. I mean, whenever you watch people that are fussing, how many of you have ever been around people who are fighting? Feuding. That's frustrating. I mean, been around a husband and a wife that fusses all the time. Or been part of a family that can't seem to get along. Or stay in a parsonage of a husband of a pastor. No, it's not happening here. I just get, he looked at me like, what are you saying? I am afraid of him, but I'm just kidding. It's not fun to be a part of. It's not fun to be, it's frustrating. And we see frustration all over this passage of Scripture. The Pharisees, of course, are frustrated. I've already said they've been frustrated since Jesus stepped onto the stage of humanity. It plays out from chapter 2 on. We see that the disciples are frustrated because they had been able to do this before. We hear it later after the healing when Jesus goes to the house where they've retreated to and they ask Him privately, why couldn't we do it? We've done it before. Why couldn't we do it? They're frustrated. I know the Father had to be frustrated, and I'm not inserting my own mind into this. Remember the accusative statement that the Father made. He says, I brought my Son to you, Jesus. I brought Him to you because He has a need. You weren't here, so I looked to them. But they couldn't do it. So we see the frustration everywhere in the midst of this argument. But there is a point that I think that many of us would read over, and it's important for us to look at. It's found in verse 19. It's a part of the frustration that we may choose not to see, but it's very real. Now, I'm a guy, I don't title my sermons. I know there are some people that preach, they say, I'm going to preach this, and then they preach it all the way through, and I admire those people. I just can't do that. So usually what happens, now I do name them, I put them in sets and things like that, and so I do name them, but usually how I get their names is I'm at a church or in a camp meeting or something of the sort, and the sound guy will ask me, hey, what's the name of your sermon? And I'll say it's Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 27, that's what I call it. I say, call it whatever you want to. And so what I'm hoping for, when I go back to look at the title, I want to see what they came up with. And so I'll look at that title, and sometimes I think, that's not what I said. But then I realize that's what they heard, so obviously that's what I said, and so I kind of work through that. But every now and then there's a very good one
And so what I do is I steal that title and I never give them credit. I was at a camp meeting in West Virginia with my friend Susie Schellenberger. Susie and I write together, and so we were over there, and one night she preached a sermon, and it was called "What's in Your Bowl?" Talking about how God stores up those prayers, tears, things like that. What's in your bowl? Where there was an unfortunate misplaced vowel in the title of her sermon on all the CDs. We got the CD, we saw it, and it said, "What's in your bowel?" That's a whole different sermon, but anyhow, I don't know why I told you that, but anyway, you know, I usually like to get that and see what it is, and then I'll steal it. But I do in my Bible study, I do title verses from time to time because it helps me to keep, kind of gives me a map. It helps me to see where I'm going. And if I were going to give the first 2/3 of verse 19 a title, I would call it Love's Frustration. Because that's what we see here. Love's frustration. In the midst of everything else that's going on, love's frustration. They could not. So Jesus responds, "O faithless generation, how long shall I bear with you? How long shall I be with you?" Love's frustration. Now Matthew does something interesting here. Matthew says that Jesus says, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long do I bear with you? How long do I stay with you?" And really, when you get into the word meanings, when you see the picture, gives you the idea of what he's addressing is this issue of two-facedness, duplicity. But I think two-faced is a good term because I think we can all relate to that. We've all come across people, right, that we would call two-faced. Do I need to illustrate it? You know, there are those people that love you to death to your face. They do. You're just the greatest thing. They just eat you up. It's the greatest thing in the world. But then as you're turning around, man, they're patting you on the back and it starts to sting a little bit because you feel the dagger as they begin to... See, in the Deep South, they call that Southern hospitality. But I've seen it in the East, I've seen it in the West, I've seen it in the North. It's everywhere. It's this idea of putting on a front. It's the one, for instance, who will come to church on Sunday and shout it out and sing the songs. But then they go to work on Monday and they're shouting other things. They go to Sunday school and they know all the right words to say to the Sunday school teacher. They have all the right answers. But then when they get home, the words that they use with their own children don't seem to line up with the things that they know that they're supposed to say. They're the ones that will stand and testify, but then tear their spouse apart. When the pastor's around, wonderful things are said. When they close the car door, every name in the book. And I'm just going to say this politely. There is nothing more perverse than someone who claims to be one thing when they're actually another. There is nothing more perverse, more profane than to call yourself a Christian and to live just like the world. So as politely as I can, if you aren't willing to allow him to work in your life and to walk in the light that he gives you, if you're not willing to live it, do us all a favor and stop calling yourself a Christian. You may be fooling yourself. No one else is fooled. And you're giving the rest of us a bad name. You two-faced generation. That's what he's saying. Well, who is he talking to? For the sake of time, let me answer a question with a question. It's not good practice, but I'll do it. Who is he not talking to? You know, he's speaking to the Pharisees, the religious leadership, because they were the ones, if we're completely honest, who should have recognized who he was.
They were the ones who should have seen the fulfillment of the prophecies. They should have understood what was right before them. But instead, they were wrapped up in themselves. They had their religious system exactly like they wanted it. They were lost in their rituals so much that they missed the relationship. They were two-faced. They weren't concerned about God's kingdom. They were concerned about theirs. You know he's talking to the remaining 9 disciples. It was the whole focus of what we looked at last night. For 6 days, they've rebelled against the plan. They've rebelled against the king. They said it doesn't happen that way. Messiahs don't die. And now they're going to operate. They're going to experience kingdom power. No, they're not living in that kingdom. So we know he's talking to them. I mean, you can just look all around. It's all over there. You two-faced generation. It's love, frustration. And then hear what he says. How much longer? And I won't stay here this long, but how much longer? Can I remind you, Jesus knows what the hour is. He knows in chapter 11 the Passion's beginning. They're in that 3rd year, and he's been walking now for 33. And you understand that everything that you've ever felt, everything that you've ever gone through, he is acquainted with. There is no emotion. There is no feeling. That means that he knows what it means to be homesick. That means that he knows what it means to be misunderstood. Everybody misunderstood him. Can you imagine? We sing songs, or at least, I grew up singing songs about heaven. We talk about golden streets. We talk about walls of jasper. I don't even know what it is, but I'd love to see it. Walls of jasper, gates of pearl, crystal sea. And I've watched people get red in the face over their mansion on the hilltop. You ever seen that? They've changed my mansion to a room. Well, calm down, because if that's the way you feel, you probably haven't got either. So it's okay. And I believe that heaven is going to be everything that the book says it's going to be. I want you to understand that. I do. But I also know that we are limited. We are finite creatures. And we use words like gold, we use words like mansion, we use words like crystal and jasper, because those are the most beautiful things, the most beautiful images we can conjure in our mind. And you realize when we get there, heaven is going to far outshine any of those things. You know how I know that? Because when we get there, we will be in the presence of the one who made it all possible. We'll be there with him. And if it's just a little dirt path, I believe it's more than that. But if it were, it would still be heaven, and it would be the most beautiful place. And we will spend eternity not lounging in a hammock, not stuffing ourselves with food. We will spend eternity worshiping and serving the one who made it all possible. We're going to shout loud up there, and I can't wait. That's what heaven will be. And we talk about how we're so ready to go. What a day that will be. I'm homesick for heaven. And we've never been there. Now, I believe there is something that draws us, but we've never been there. He had. If there are golden streets, his feet had walked down those avenues. If there was a crystal sea, his toes had dangled in it. And now he's been walking through manure for 33 years and getting dirt under his nails, being misunderstood, homesick. Can you imagine how ready he was? How much longer? Love's frustration, the first 2/3 of verse 19. But the wonderful thing I've learned about love's frustration is that it never seems to last for long. You really need to work on it. That was a good place for an amen. Because by the time you hit the last third, you transition from love's frustration to love's invitation. Would you hear what he says? You faithless generation. How long do I bear with you? How long shall I be with you? Frustration. Bring him to me. Invitation. Oh, see, I love those words. Because on this side of the story, it reminds me that Jesus can do what we fail to do. it reminds me that Jesus will do what we cannot do. It reminds me on this side of the story that there is nothing impossible with my Jesus. I mean, listen to love's invitation to the father of the boy. And it's so beautiful because one thing I know, Mark brings this out throughout his gospel. Jesus is very intentional with the language that he uses. He's intentional in every aspect of his life. We need to become intentional as well. But Jesus often uses his words. We saw it when we were talking about Peter. He uses it for rebuke. I mean, sometimes very harshly. But many times he uses his words to embrace those that need be embraced. I think about the man who's lowered through the roof. The paralytic. To his mind and to everybody else's mind, just like that woman, he is getting exactly what he deserves. And who knows how long he had been on that mat. You realize that if you're told something enough times, propagandists know this. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. If it is hammered within you, you begin to believe it. If you begin to tell your children constantly over and over that they can't do anything right, then sooner or later, Mom and Dad, they're going to begin to believe that they can't do anything right. You begin to tear your spouse down. They're going to believe that that's who they are. Words are very powerful. And this man had heard that he is getting what he deserves his entire life. Whether he'd been on that mat that long, we don't know. But he had heard that entire life. And so he believed he was getting what he deserved. Everybody around him believed that he was getting it. You remember the question, why is this man blind? Is it because of sin in his life or sin in his family's life? That was Jewish thought process. And the first thing that Jesus says to this man is son. It's a powerful image. Especially when we begin to understand that Jesus didn't talk like that. We don't think much about it because we call people son. Or we walk around calling them brother, sister, sis, bub, pal. We just use that language. But in this Jewish context, this is familial, not familiar. It would carry that weight in the family, but it's familial language. If you're referring to one as son, it likely means they're your son. Jesus only speaks like this 3 times throughout Mark's gospel. This is the first. The second time is the woman that we talked about who suffered for 12 years, slipped in and touched the hem of his garment, was prostrate at his feet, and now we see him as he calls her daughter. The third time is when these 12 men, his inner circle, are sitting around a table that he knows in just a few hours their world is going to be shaken. The cross is going to penetrate every bit of hope that they found in him. So he looks at them and he calls them little ones. It's in the masculine, so he calls them sons. It's very rare, very touching. He embraces people with his words. He lifted that man from the mat emotionally before he ever lifted him physically. And when we hear him say, bring him to me, to the Father, I can only imagine the message behind the words. I don't know if he felt it, but to me, as he said, bring him to me, it's almost as though as Jesus is saying to this man, don't be frightened by this crowd that's gathered around you. Don't be intimidated by the quarreling that's going on everywhere. Don't get caught up in all that fussing. Don't be discouraged by the frustration that it's bringing about, the frustration that you're feeling and experiencing. And don't be paralyzed. Don't feel paralyzed by your own inability to do anything about it. Why? Because in love's invitation, there's possibility. I've come to tell you that tonight. I want to tell you a little bit stronger than that. In love's invitation, there is unlimited possibility. Oh, it's incredible. How do we know it's unlimited? Because we hear it in the request and promise of help in verses 22 and 23. You hear the Father. And don't judge him on this. Remember what's been going on. He explains everything that's been going on, but then he goes on to say, if you can do anything, have mercy on us, have compassion on us, and help us. Well, let me ask you, how small may anything be? if you can do anything, the Father says, but then Jesus has a way of turning things around. Have you noticed that about Jesus? You better watch it. He'll turn it around. Because he says, if you can. I would like to call that verse the sarcasm of Jesus, but some people wouldn't like it, so I won't. If you can, what do you mean? If, that's the thrust of it. If you can, all things, that's what he says, are possible to him who believes. Can I ask you this? How large is all? If you can do anything, might be pretty small. What is anything? All things are possible if you can believe. What are all things? It's not a trick question. All things. I've come here to announce to you that there is unlimited possibility in love's invitation. All things are possible. And the only requirement you hear in love's invitation, did you catch it? If you can believe. That's so incredible to me. Because he doesn't say, if you deserve it, then I'll do it. How many of us would be quick to do something like that? If you work hard enough, God helps those who help themselves. If you, not even, if you're the one who loves the most. I did that like I was going to hug you. I'm not hugging you. No. The only requirement is simply if you can believe. All things are possible. So the question is not whether or not Jesus can do anything about it. Whether or not Jesus can. The question really becomes, can the Father believe that Jesus can do it? The only requirement in love's invitation is belief. And I'm just going to put this out there because I feel like we're friends. I'm so glad that he didn't qualify a quantity or an amount of faith that one must have in order to see Jesus' power displayed in a situation. Aren't you thankful for that? He didn't say, for instance, if you have great faith, then all things are possible. No, he didn't say that. And I'm thankful he didn't say that. He didn't put an amount on it. The reason I'm thankful for it, I told you, I'm just going to be very real. I've known people with great faith. I have. My papa was one of those people. I've mentioned him a few times. He pastored Wofford Missionary Baptist Church in Wofford, Kentucky for over 60 years. No fame, no recognition, lived in a little trailer in a field out by the church. Nothing wrong with the trailer, but I wish you could see this one. Drove around in little rusted out cars, and the Lord had to travel with him. Because if you ever traveled in southeast Kentucky down those 2-lane roads that go around the mountain, and you meet your backside before you get around the mountain, you better be, if you rode with Papa, you were praying that old Susanna wasn't coming around the other way because Papa was in her lane. I mean, God had to be with him. But drove around in those little rusted out vehicles. I had the privilege, probably 10 years or so ago now, of preaching my papa's funeral. And, you know, he's my papa, so he's a hero to me. And so I wanted to talk with other people, and because I had these ideas in my mind, the papa that I remembered. And so I asked my cousins, I asked different friends of his, different ones I know, I asked them to tell me about my papa, and then I asked them different things. And they all said the same thing. They affirmed what I thought I believed. I can say to you that I never heard one time my papa complain. I'm not making that up. I never heard my papa complain about his circumstances, situation. I never heard my papa say one bad thing about any person. Never had. Now, my mama was another story. Maybe that's why he didn't. Maybe he felt like she did enough, but you know, but I never heard that. And if anybody had the right to complain, If anybody had the right to say some things, I mean, they ran him off after all those years. It was him. And there were times that he should have given up, but he didn't. He was a man of great faith. I knew a man named Clyde Perry. He was out of the Pilgrim Holiness movement when there was one. He came out of the hills of West Virginia, started preaching when he was 15, one of the best preachers I've ever heard in my life. Died alone, horrible disease. He had great faith. I'm going to confess to you, I don't think I do. Things happen in my life and I get a little bit shaken. I've already told you, I lay in bed and things go through my mind. I get concerned. Oh, who am I kidding? I'm not going to make it holy. I worry. I know He'll take care of me. So I'm not ashamed to say that because many of you do the same exact thing. I don't have great faith. But He didn't say, if you have great faith. In fact, Jesus did set a standard for faith. Actually, in this story out of Matthew's account, chapter 17, verse 20, this is what Jesus said to the disciples. You couldn't do it because of your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you'll say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Faith the size of a grain of mustard seed. And there's this little argument that goes around. I always had heard that a mustard seed was the smallest seed that there was. But now there's some people who think that they're small, and they say, well, actually, it's not there. I don't care. It's pretty small. Mark chapter 11, verses 22 and 23, on a different occasion, when they're looking at a fig tree that Jesus had cursed, Jesus says, the disciples, have faith in God. For assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. The only requirement in love's invitation is belief. If you can believe, all things are possible. Well, we hear the response to love's invitation in verse 24. As the Father speaks to Jesus through His tears. I wonder, have you ever caught that? I've read over that my entire life. He says to Him through His tears. He says, I believe. And let's be real honest. If He did not believe when He had brought His boy to the place where He believed Jesus to be, obviously He believed that. If He didn't believe that these men who had done it back in chapter 6 could touch His boy, when He had looked to them to do for His boy what needed to be done, obviously He believed it. But now He's in the midst of all this confusion. He's in the midst of all this chaos. Everything has been going wrong. And so through His tears, I believe, He says, help my unbelief. Oh, I love that. Because in that unfeigned honesty of the Father, it's such a raw moment, one of the most raw, real moments we have in Scripture. We see a transparency that's rarely seen because in His response, we see faith mixed with fear and unbelief. We hear a cry for help that He realizes is beyond Himself. If anything is going to happen, if anything is going to change, then Jesus is the only hope. He is the only source. I believe, help my unbelief. And let me just throw this at you. We need that kind of honesty in church. We do. Now, we don't need to air our dirty laundry. I said that last night. Most of you use Facebook for that. But I mean, but we need. In my life, when I was 15, I told you I started going to the Church of the Nazarene, and there was a lady in our congregation. Her name was Mrs. Trout. And if you looked at Mrs. Trout, you'd say, man, that woman's holy. Because she had a bun so tight in her head, it was giving her a facelift. Come on. If you went to the world for it, it'd be similar. Just twist it up and do it. Oh, loosen up. I'm going to have a good time with you. You know, she had her shirt neck up her neck to her chin. Her sleeves came down not as long as mine did. Mine are too long, but they came down like that. And then she's probably walking on her skirt. She looked holy, but I'm going to say this. I'm not being disrespectful. She was holy.
she was the real deal. I've met some of those little twisted bun lady that aren't so sweet. But this one was holy. And I remember as a 15-year-old boy who knew nothing of holiness, who came from a different background, all that, and knew nothing about what full salvation meant and victory and living. I remember hearing her stand and begin to share about struggles in her life and how God was faithful to bring her through. And, there was something that happened in a 15-year-old boy that saw a 100-year-old woman. I don't know if she was 100, but she looked at a 15-year-old. I remember when 30 was old, and now I'm 46. But anyhow, looking over there, I remember thinking, if she has struggles and God helps her, then He'll help me too. And my heart is breaking because we don't hear that in church anymore. I'm wondering where our senior saints are, and I'm not trying to be hard on you. I'm just trying to share my heart. We need to hear how God has brought you through. Because when kids, young people hear people that they look at and think, some people think you've got it all together. You're not fooling the rest of us, but some people think you do. And when they look at you and see you acting like everything's roses and their life is anything but, they begin to think, well, I can never be like that. I don't have a family like that. All I hear senior saints doing now is standing up and complaining. I mean, young people do their part of it too, but I'm just saying, we need this kind of transparency. It's encouraging. I believe, help my unbelief. That's all that Jesus needed to hear. Because we watch Him in verse 25, He begins to respond to this authentic response of the Father. We see the authority of Jesus. You all do realize that Jesus is the source of authority. And so we hear Him as He gives a command, and I want you to hear what He speaks to this evil spirit. He says, come out of him and enter him no more. Do you realize, I said it on Sunday morning, that we have a God that does things completely. He doesn't have to do it. Come out of him and enter him no more. And since he is the source of authority, this evil spirit must obey. Because when authority speaks, it must be obeyed. So we watch. Oh, it's not going to go easily. There's a battle that's going on. There's kicking and screaming. But here we watch, when all is said and done, the evil is pulled out of this boy. And if you want to see power, here's power. I have a God, I have a Jesus that can make a deaf and dumb spirit speak. I have a Jesus that can cause a deaf and dumb spirit, a mute spirit, to find its voice, to rebel against what he's being told. But he screams, but it doesn't do any good. When all is said and done, he has to come out. The boy falls as if he's dead, and everybody says, look, he's dead. Jesus reaches down, lifts him up to new life. Jesus has literally given him his life back. And what we learn from the entire story is that it's not about our faith. We put faith in a whole lot of things. It's not about our faith. Rather, it's in whom we place our faith. That's what makes the difference. So I wonder tonight, where is your faith placed? And I preached all this time to come to here. I'm going to ask you a question. And it's an honest question. And I think all of us can answer it. Don't answer it out loud, but we all can answer. What is it in your life that you're believing God to do? I could say it like this. What are you believing God for in your life? Or I could say, what do you need Him to do? We all have something. The mere fact that you're here tells me that you have something. I mean, above everything else, we all have friends and family who are outside the family of God. that we ought to be praying that they come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, and maybe that He would use us as a tool to see that happen. So we ought to, above everything else, be believing Him for them. But there are other things that go on. We live in a real world. Life isn't easy, nor is it always fun. So there could be somebody in here saying, I'm believing God to put my relationship back together. Could be a marriage, could be a friendship, I believe. Seems like we're just getting farther and farther apart no matter what we do. There could be somebody in here that says, you know what, I haven't talked to my son or my daughter in years. Maybe there's a father that would say, me and my boy, we just don't see eye to eye. A mother would say, me and my girl, we just haven't gotten along. And maybe you're believing for reconciliation there. There could be somebody in here that has a health need. And the doctors, maybe you haven't even told anybody, but the doctors have said, you know what, you need to start checking things off of your bucket list. Because there's no more we can do. I don't know. I just, maybe there's an emotional need, financial need. I just want to ask you, what are you believing Him for? And then I want to change the question just a little bit. Do you, in that situation, believe that He is able to do what needs to be done? I'm going to ask that again and listen carefully. Do you believe in that situation that He is able to do what needs to be done? The reason why I want to stress that needs part is because if you're like me, I believe, if I really wanted to take a shallow interpretation of this and say, hey, Billy's preaching that name it and claim it. He's preaching that blab it and grab it. If I can just believe, anything's possible. Well, if I believe that, I know what I do. Because I know what I think needs to happen in circumstances. I mean, I'd be the kind of guy that say, Jesus, Billy here. I need $1 million. And you can act like you wouldn't, but some of you would ask for 2. He doesn't think so, but I can say that He has given me everything that I need. I don't go hungry. I don't go cold. I don't go unfed. He will do what needs to be done. Do you believe that He can? The reason why I ask you that is because when we come to the Word of God, and I've not shared this with you, but I'll just say I have a high view of Scripture. I believe the Word of God is the Word of God. I don't believe it's a dead book. I believe it's living. I believe it's active. This is the written Word through which we encounter the living Word that leads us into the resurrected Word's power. And so when we watch the Word issue love's invitation in the valley of living on that day, it wasn't a one-time invitation. It's an invitation that has echoed across the ages, across time. It comes to you in your circumstance. It comes to me in my circumstance. That relationship that's falling apart, bring it to me. That son or daughter that you cannot see eye to eye with, bring him, bring her to me. That physical need that seems impossible, bring it to me. That find whatever it may be, bring it to me, because I'm here to announce to you tonight that there is still unlimited possibility in love's invitation, an invitation that goes out to everyone here. And they will, if we would just come to the place that we would believe nothing could be impossible. Everything can happen if we will just believe, and maybe even be so honest that we say, I believe, help my unbelief. Love's invitation. What do you need him to do? What are you believing him to do? Hear his voice. Bring it to me. Jesus, tonight we love you. Oh, we really do. I do. And I'm so thankful for your love for me. I'm thankful that you are the kind of God that cares about every area of our lives. And you invite us to bring every area of our lives. In fact, you long for us to bring every area of our lives to you. My brothers and sisters have been so kind to me over these past few days, been very patient with me, and yet I know that we've been here together in your presence and you're speaking tonight. You know where they're living. I don't. And because you know, there's no question in my mind, you have orchestrated this time for them, for me. So help us, when we realize we have a God that loves us that much, to orchestrate these moments. Help none of us to leave here the same. Why would any of us ever leave here the same? Help us to bring whatever it is to you and leave this place differently than when we came. Well, I'm going to invite you, with your heads bowed, to stand to your feet, please. There are altars here. I don't know why you're waiting for me to invite you. I do believe that God has brought us together like this for a purpose. I believe He knew that we would be here. And He knew what Lily would need to hear. He knew what you would need to hear. And I don't know, maybe I'm just getting older. I'm just amazed that we would have the realization that we have a God like that who orchestrates these moments, and then we would refuse to respond. We would rather leave here the same way that we came than to allow Him to do something in our lives. So I'm going to beg you. I can't do it for you. No one can. But I'm going to beg you. I'm not too good today. Will you bring it to Him tonight? Please don't leave here the same way that you came. In a moment, Pastor Jamie will lead us in a closing prayer. But while we wait, there's still time to respond. You can do it in your seat, but what a wonderful thing to just come to an altar of prayer. You do what the Lord would have you to do.